My name is Alister Jones, and I am the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of the University of Waikato. I've been in this role for about 13 years and maybe 15 years, actually. And previous to that, I was a Dean of Education. I was Director of the Wolf Malcolm Institute, Director of the Centre for Science and Technology Education Research. It was through the Centre for Science and Technology Education Research in the early 90s, and even slightly before that, that I became involved in technology education. And I think it's been a really exciting journey, and I want to congratulate TENZ on surviving 10 years, sorry, 30 years, and being much stronger. And I think fulfilling the vision that some of us wanted to had in back 30 years ago. So congratulations, and to all the technology teachers, to all the lecturers, to the broader communities who engage in technology education. I just want to personally thank you because you're the people that have made the vision become a reality for our learners right across the country.
Oh, ngā mihi nui kia koe, Alistair. Thank you so much for introducing yourself. You did a much better job than I would have. And thank you for sharing your time with us in this webinar. And with TENZ's 30th birthday, it would be absolutely fabulous to have a think back about some of your memories of the development of TENZ in terms of its establishment and where it came from.
I guess it came from in 1992. I came back from King's College in London and was brought back in many ways to help write the original policy statements around technology education, what it might look like from a curriculum point of view, what it might look like from implementation, right through to teaching, learning, and assessment. That required national engagement right across the country. And for 2 days a week, I would spend time going and talking to teachers, to other graphics and technology teachers association, design technology, home economics teachers, science teachers, and broader community groups as well, Royal Society, engineers, government ministers. And part of that process, it really made me realize that if we're going to implement something like this, there's no point in having just a curriculum, even though it might be the best in the world. There's no point in having the best implementation strategy in the world unless you really developed right from the ground up a really strong professional association. And it was one of the things I noticed in the UK was if you had a strong professional organisation which actually looked after professional development, created resources, took ownership of their own destiny rather than being influenced by the latest political wind, then you would be able to create better outcomes for learners. So I guess that was the learning from what I'd seen about what worked, what didn't work. And so after we had written the curriculum, the policy work, then writing the curriculum in 93, going out for that initial trial and the draft, and coming back in 95 and rewriting it and reframing it and refining it, we began the process of the facilitator training. So that was a really important milestone to begin in 1996. And I think part of that, that 95, 96, and I think part of that made me realize that if you train and government invested millions of dollars, then these things don't last forever. So how do you then create an organization which will continue to support it? So in 95, 96, with Glenn McGregor, we actually thought, how do we, and he'd been with the New Zealand Science Teachers Association at the time, which was now NZASE, how do you take some of the learnings from that and, but you wanted to be able to leverage that. So really, it began in a very small prefab building, which has now been demolished to create the University of Waikato PA, which is now part of the Faculty of Māori and Indigenous Studies. So it's been quite a journey, but that prefab and those discussions were about creating longevity. So we then created that in a very simple way. We employed someone Glenn McGregor, and to go around the country, because we realised that we had to be able to have an organisational structure without even having an organisation. And I think that was really the starting point. So it wasn't grassroots, but it was to try and get the balance right between those different aspects and taking the learning of what had been done previously. And the Royal Society was key in that, because they provided the secretariat and we paid for Glyn. So I think we were able to accelerate it rather than starting small. So we started with a bigger vision and tried to create a structure which then things could become part of.
Oh, I would love to know a little bit about the decision, and a little more about the decision to follow a trust board structure.
The trust, yeah, I mean, it's a good point. Why we went for a trust and created trustees was because we want to create an organisation that would support people rather than people having to worry about keeping bank accounts, creating a secretariat. So by creating a secretariat and a trust board, we tried to create longevity from the beginning, so that it was designed in terms of putting some robustness and legal entity around it, without I guess allowing people to get on with their job, essentially, and for TENZ to run a conference, for TENZ to be part of a global network. If you're constantly worried about where the next dollar comes from or what's your legal entity, then that could become a distraction. So we want to avoid some of that. So the trust was a way of ensuring that we're a charitable trust, that we had legal requirements, but we also got buy-in from key people as well, that we did have a legal entity to be able to move forward and get registered and be a good steward of any money that we'd used from savings and other projects that we'd put into this. But also, if you're asking teachers for money, then you need to be a good steward of that. And so we didn't ask for teachers. Creating the trust board meant we didn't have to ask teachers for money in the first instance.
And I love how big the thinking was with TENZ. You mentioned you started big. The aims of the organisation are quite comprehensive to try and support pretty much from cradle to grave, really, in the technology education sector. Could you talk a little bit about the aims of TENZ?
Yes, I mean, the aims are very much what TENZ has now. I mean, they haven't changed in some ways. When I had another look at them, I thought I'd better just refresh my memory. There's nothing in there that I would change. I think, that we made them broad because we needed to be a broad organisation. And I think we needed to make sure that we took teacher educators, we took professionals with us as well, people who were not teachers, who were out in the community. So we wanted TENZ to be a broad church, if you like, that it was inclusive of other things. You could belong to the Graphic Teachers Association as well as you could belong to TENZ. So we weren't trying to be exclusive, but trying to say that here's a home for you, here's a place that will produce resources. I think what I also saw was that ministry contracts come and go. And we were quite well supported in the early days, but I saw that was going to end. And so you need to create something long term that will allow those resources to carry on, allow the momentum, the values that people have put in, and the mahi that people have put into things to be able to continue. I think the other thing is, by keeping it large, we actually joined a broader international group of technology educators. So, we joined with the US, we joined, in Southeast Asia and Hong Kong and in the UK. So suddenly we were part, and Australia. So suddenly we were part of we're a global organisation. I think if you start too small, we couldn't have done that. We would have taken years and years to create that. So it was just a way of being ambitious I guess. And in being ambitious, I was hoping to create something that would have longevity and be owned by the profession, not owned by somebody else.
One of the other things, my involvement with TENZ has been much shorter. Coming in as a student teacher, I think back in 2000s, 2008. But to my question, I really like the way that TENZ balances kind of the different aspects that teachers need, because education and the curriculum is one part of it, but research is also very important. And it looks like TENZ started with the aims of balancing the research with the education.
We had to. I think one of the things was that, as I said, we wanted to be broad, so teacher education had to be part of it. Professional development had to be part of it. We also had to create a major research agenda. And so when I say it was broad, it wasn't, it was included early childhood teachers right through to professors of education. And in terms of creating a conference, it had a very strong, back in 1997, was really having having that first conference. 400 teachers turning up to a conference was pretty amazing. And for its first conference, and that was because we had things which were practical use for teachers. It was about curriculum implementation, but it was also about how do you develop the research culture, what research is going on, bringing global leaders from around the world, from the UK, from Australia, from the US to speak at the conference around issues that were going on then, spoke to that broader audience. So research, professional development, the know-how tapes, all those sorts of things were really important from my perspective. And it's not just about me, but creating that broader view of what a professional organisation could look like. And we saw it as a professional organisation, not as a teacher organisation, but as a professional organisation.
Very cool. Maybe that's a good cue for us to swing a little bit to the philosophy, more and purpose of technology education in Aotearoa. Big picture question, and in terms of the original philosophy and purpose of technology education in Aotearoa with the Jockey Docky.
Oh gosh, okay. Well, as I said, it's been a while since I've been directly involved. But I think in those days we wanted to. What I saw, see, technology education also goes back in its early days to the late 80s as well. So people were using technology to teach science, for example. People, the graphics were moving to much more around design briefs. So there was a general trend across a number of subjects. And we saw what had happened with the design and technology curriculum in the UK, what was happening with the technology curriculum in the US. And one of the things is I came from a science background, and what I saw in the UK when I was there involved in the curriculum, national science curriculum, was if you took just a process approach, you didn't bring in technology and society, you didn't bring the values in. If you didn't bring the knowledge, people were, oh, you can just do this without knowledge. So when we created the policy papers, we wanted to really emphasize that technology is a value-laden activity, no matter what. It's a human activity. It also has an incredible knowledge base to it. You don't just invent things without knowing not just how to do things, but having knowledge that you need to deploy. And so how do you teach that knowledge in engineering? How do you teach it in computer graphic design? What are those things that you actually do? So the philosophy was also to say that we were a bicultural society as well. So having mātauranga Māori before in there right from the get-go was really important. So taking those different cultural values, taking the history and philosophy of technology, I always believed that you don't understand a subject unless you understand the history and philosophy.
Yeah.
So therefore, we ended up with technology and society. We ended up with technological knowledge, even though it was difficult to define. We weren't going to resolve from that. We were going to get people to think about what the design process was about and what technological practice might be. So we overplayed it a bit, I think, but it wasn't a bad thing to do, was then to say, well, not you need to think about technological areas. When I think about engineering, that's technology, but a mechanical engineer is very different from a mechanical engineer. A food technologist is very different from a graphic designer. And so you needed to think about technology in particular areas. And I think that was unique as well, that we actually began to define those areas. And so we wanted to say that you needed conceptual understanding as well as procedural understanding. And
Mm.
unless you had that balance right, then you got distortion in learning and distortion in outcomes.
And I think that that original philosophy came through quite strongly, but shifted from technology and society to nature of technology in the 2008 curriculum.
Yeah, and that was fine. I was very comfortable because I always saw it as being that when I ran my master's programs, we started off with the history and nature of technology.
Mm-mm.
That was the first 5 weeks of lectures. And then technological practice, what does it mean? So I think the history and philosophy was really important. And that came through from, I guess, my work in science, that to understand science, you had to actually understand science. To understand technology, you had to understand the nature of technology. So that's in the nature of technology, that's when we embedded the history and philosophy of it. So what does it come to need to know? When you're designing a bridge, what do you need to know? And that technology is not a whole series of big bangs of new innovations, but it's a gradual process. So knowing, and then the nature of technology allowed you to bring in other knowledges as well. So what was the technological aspects, for example, of Pacific navigation? What are the technological, those kinds of things? So the nature of technology to me is a fundamental thing, and we actually brought in the nature of nature of the subject of the discipline when we did our curriculum enhancement project at the University of Waikato. So every discipline has to cover some aspects of the nature of the discipline at an undergraduate level.
Okay, the curriculum enhancement project sounds fascinating. Could you give me just a little bit more about that? I know it's a tangent.
It is a tangent. I mean, one of the things we want to do was to create a common structure across all our degrees.
Mm.
So you would have things like work integrated learning. Every subject would have to have that. They'd have to have a cultural aspect. So it might be Māori, it might be a cultural aspect of international business, and you also had to have a component of the nature of the discipline.
Mm. Okay. I don't think I'm jumping here, but I know it's a draft, and there are good and bad things about any draft. Obviously, that may need refining. But just focusing in on the knowledge-rich component, because I think that actually gives us potential to really enhance and develop the nature of technology component of the technology curriculum.
You mean the current one?
Well, so yeah, maybe we don't need to talk specifically about the current draft, but maybe more about, like I said, the potential that there is within the idea of a knowledge-rich curriculum for nature of technology to become forefront.
Absolutely. I think, I don't want to I'm not as familiar with the current curriculum debates because I have, a reasonable
Absolutely.
other job to do. But I've never lost my passion for curriculum. Or technology, but I think one of the things is the notion of knowledge rich in the current initiatives is not necessarily a bad thing for technology. We want to bring out the creative side. We want to bring out the technological practice side, but people knowing about technology, not to be scared of technology, that it is a value-driven activity, is actually empowering. And so, I don't think we should hide away from that. And I think, people knowing how things work, how, even our smart devices are all value driven. Social media is social driven, your smartphone socially driven. Understanding that in association with how we value particular knowledges, we actually ignore other ones, is actually, I think, a really important thing for students to understand. And it really is fundamental to technological literacy, that we actually can empower our students through a knowledge-rich technology curriculum. It's not to deny the practice part of it at all. It's getting the balance right.
Awesome. Now, in terms of thinking about curriculum and TENZ and technology education, I'm just wondering, is there anything you feel is important, or anything that pops to front of mind? Could be a recollection during your time as chairman of TENZ. It could be way back when. But are there any thoughts that pop into your mind that maybe um, would be good in the context of this discussion?
I think one of the things is that often we focus on individuals, when in actual fact, individuals can only do things if they surround themselves with the right people, or have the right people there, and you take people with you, and you create I think I don't want to use the word legacy, but you create a sustainable culture that can mold and change as things move on, and where people get value from and influences others. So it's interesting that, it's very interesting for me that TENZ hasn't died, that it actually has become a generational thing. 30 years is an amazing achievement. And I think that goes back to those original people, and who were the curriculum writers, who had a real passion, not just the curriculum writers, but the researchers, the PhD students, the facilitator training, all those people who just brought so much enthusiasm and energy, and are still involved. Some of them have moved on, but I think, I'm grateful, I think, for the enthusiasm and commitment that other people brought. That's what stands out for me.
Mm.
Not the individuals. It's the collective, I think, which is far more important than individuals.
I
And you
couldn't
need
agree.
individuals, but
Yeah.
I think that's what stands out. Why did people grab this? I mean, obviously the curriculum and those initiatives meant something to people, and I think what was different about this process, it was top down, but there was those 2 years of going around the country, engaging with groups, talking to other professional associations that we weren't taking them over. They were part of this journey. And I think that's what made a real difference. So that's what stands out for me. It's the people.
Speaking of people, I will be catching up with Vicky Compton
Oh,
and
right. Oh, good.
Wendy Fox Turnbull soon.
Oh,
Uh,
good.
do you have any questions for them?
I don't know, because I see Wendy, because Wendy and I work in the same place, so
Yes.
that's okay.
And you're both in leadership roles.
I haven't seen Vicky for a while, but I think my questions for them are really in terms of recollection. What made a real difference for them, I think, is probably, it's worth. I think after 30 years, it's worth reflecting on. I think, Vicky and Wendy had a real influence on curriculum nationally and internationally. And I think they were people that really took on board some of those values, interpreted them, through their own lens, but then had a big impact on other people. So I think I don't know if I have questions for them, but it's probably more being grateful for people like them who carried on and provided all that support to TENZ and the wider technology, both nationally and globally, that we should be grateful for. So asking them about their reflections, I think, is important.
Ka pai. Well, ngā mihi nui ki a koe, Alister. I tēnei ahi ahi. He rangi paki, Tāmaki Makaurau. We've got a lovely weather in Auckland at the moment.
So are we down here. So in
Oh,
Hamilton.
wow. Well, cross fingers. I would just like to acknowledge you and thank you for sharing your time and your memories with us this afternoon.
At least I've still got them, Ruth.
Well, I'm starting to lose mine.
I really appreciate the conversation.